Thank you, thank you. Man, all these beautiful people on stage doing all these things. I know you guys are looking at me right now and you go, man, they brought a supermodel here today. Boom, boom. Today I'm going to share a little bit about, my life. I'm going to, take a piece of my heart and I'm going to share it with you guys. And there's things I'm going to talk about today that I've never spoken about, that I've only written down in my journal. And I'm going to tell you a story about a little boy. A little boy that, the world tried to bury deep in the darkest of places. But what the world didn't realize, this boy was a seed. I grew up in a house that was a raging storm of violence. At an early age, I had all the ingredients to make a disaster of a recipe. My father, he was stabbed to death 28 times. The last one hit him in his heart, where he died right in my driveway. 28 times. Doesn't that seem excessive? 28 times. They even tried cutting off the back of his leg so he couldn't run. You see, there was a lot of anger here. This was revenge that was being taken out on my father. And I don't want to say he's the victim here, because my father was engaged in some of the darkest places of this world, and that was prostitution and pimping. My brother was born from a prostitute. My mother, I never got the story, but she's in there somehow. And so he had turned the wrong young lady. She had brothers. She had uncles. She had a dad. And when they caught the opportunity, they were going to make sure that my father never walked away from it. And that was a lifetime of repercussions, not having a father there. And even a short time later, my grandfather was murdered 2 blocks away from where my father was murdered. He was also stabbed to death. And so he was a guy, he ruled with an iron fist. And he beat my uncles, and he beat my father. And that's what he thought a man was. And I wish I could tell you that it gets better, but my mother, she's lost, she's broken, she's hurt, she's being raised in the foster care system. There was things that I found out that happened to her by her own family members. And my mom made choices that was based out of that brokenness. And she would go anywhere where any man would show her any affection. And I always describe it like this. I feel like as a child, I was my mother's carry-on luggage. She would go from different guy to different guy to different city to different city. And with each guy that passed through that house, they hurt me. They broke me. They put their hands on me like I was an adult. And I remember at 10 years old, I was sitting, and my mom had some friends over, and she had some men over there, and I was just so scared because this dude had kept beating me all day. They made me sit at the table with all these adults. And this guy comes. I'm like 8 years old. And he knees me so hard in my ribs. Everything in me was released. And I just remember thinking, why nobody helping me? Why doesn't somebody do something? All these grown adults here, and they just watched. Man, I grew up in a place where I was utterly shattered, completely broken. Now just think about this. If the people that are supposed to be nurturing me and loving me are the ones that are hurting me, what do you think my mentality is toward the streets and to the people outside of my house? Man, they trying to kill me. Now, there was something that I blocked out of my mind, and it took me years later to remember it. I was the first person my mother told me this. At 14 years old, if my life didn't suck enough, if the whole world wasn't just on my shoulders, when most of these kids at 14 were worrying about, what am I going to wear to school tomorrow? How am I going to do this homework? Do my shoes match my shirt? I was trying to figure out how I was going to live one more day. My mother picked me up from school, and once in a while we had these moments where she picked me up and, man, she would treat me to some kind of food or lunch, and so I thought I was scoring a free lunch. What happens is she drives to this free clinic, and she tells me when she gets there, I think I have AIDS. Now, the only woman that I've ever known, the only one who's loved me, and it's been broken, and it's been painful, but man, she's all I got. And I knew when she told me that, if this woman dies, no one will ever love me. She went into that clinic and she left this 14-year-old boy in that car. And she left me in there for 5 hours. Could you imagine what was just unloaded on me? For 5 hours, 1 hour passes, 2 hour passes, and all I'm sitting there is the first time in my life I'm screaming out. And I don't know who God is. I wasn't raised in that house I didn't see no Bible. But I knew that if there was a God up there, that this would be the time. And I was bargaining with him like, God, please, don't take this woman. Please, I'll be a good kid. I'll do whatever. She come back out, and she had AIDS, and she died. And what it was like this dog that was chained up to the backyard, and that dog was beaten. That dog was abused. He didn't get food. And my mother died. It was like that pit bull was released off the chain. And I took what was all that happened to me, and I put it in this mixture of this like gasoline of hatred, revenge, anger. And I used it as fuel to justify what I was doing to myself, what I was doing to the people around me. And I knew I was going to die. I was going places and doing things that even my own friends thought I was crazy. But I wasn't crazy. What they failed to understand is that I had nothing to lose, that I was hopeless. And if there was a death after this, thank God. Well, you guys can take a look at that. These pictures up. I went to prison at 24 years old. It's always the same thing. You're either dead or you go to prison. And for the next 5.5 years, I just kept doing push-ups. I kept thinking about what I was going to do when I got on these streets. This picture right here was only about 2 weeks before I left. I spent 1.5 years in the shoe. I was still mad. I was taking psych meds. I was drinking. I was doing anything I could to not feel what was going on here. And when I got out, I didn't last 3 hours. I was already back into my addiction, already drinking, already figuring out how I was going to get everything that they took. I got back out in these streets, and I didn't know what it was like to be a father. I didn't know what it was like to be a husband. Man, but I met a young lady, and she saw something different in me, and she showed me love that I wasn't used to. And we had a little daughter. And this little girl was loving me to even another degree. I was her whole world. And even though I didn't know how to be the kind of man that they needed, I knew that I loved them. But I was still in my addiction. I was still juggling 2 different lifestyles. I was still selling drugs, still in the streets, still going as hard as I needed to. And I was balancing these 2 lives. I went back to prison. And it was in a cell where I was, this is how I'll describe it. I was in Louisiana where they picked me up. And I was sitting on this floor. And there was tears that were just falling down my face. You see, I had stopped crying a long time ago. And it felt like my whole chest was completely ripped out of its frame. I kept thinking about that little girl. I kept thinking about my wife. I kept thinking about my wife was also 9 months pregnant. And I knew what the streets had in store for my family. This guy came to me in the cell when I was just sitting there crying. And he hands me a Bible. And what I didn't realize at that time, because I thought he was crazy, because I didn't recognize what I was seeing. But what I seen was that this guy had peace. And peace to me looked crazy. I went back to prison, but man, I grabbed that Bible and I started to read it. And what started to happen was that big hole in my chest started to get filled with substance. Man, stop drinking, stop doing drugs. I went back to school. I did everything that they tell you you're supposed to do. And when I got out of prison, I didn't have a resume. I had spent most of my 20s in prison. I did 12 years altogether. I couldn't get a job. I couldn't function in this world. And even though I was reading, man, it wasn't matching up. But this guy met me in the Tenderloins of San Francisco, California. He was a pastor from Simi Valley, a Chinese guy. Man, walking one way, I'm walking another way. Man, and he stops to speak to me. Man, what happened is a friendship. And within 28 days, this pastor said, "Come live with me. Come move in with me." Now, I don't know how many people would be so open to bring a guy that looked like that and looks like this into their home, but he didn't just invite me to his home. He moved from his master bedroom to the smallest room in his house. His kids moved into other rooms. He brought my wife and my kids with me, and he showed me what it was like to be a husband. He showed me what it was like to be a father, how to work hard. I seen how he was wrestling around on the floor with his kids, how he loved his wife. And we never opened up the Bible for the 8 months I lived there. We were living this thing out. Now it crossed over from what I was reading to my life. So let me tell you guys who I'm not today. I am not that lost, broken little kid. I know who I am. I know my value. I know my worth. My family is being loved. They are being nurtured. And they have never seen that monster. Now, today, you guys recognize this guy? Pastor Francis Chan? This is the guy that took me into his home. And because of the chance that he took on someone who society had given up, I had given up on myself, family had given up, he threw all care and comfort out the window. And now today, I run Francis's whole ministry in San Francisco. I am a pastor. I've been able to open up 7 churches in the last 3 years. I have discipled countless men that are coming out of prison, drugs, gangs, addiction. We have a house for guys where they live and have a safe, conducive environment. We have a women's home where we take in women and children. We're opening up a juvenile facility for kids that are between the ages of 14 and 17. I'm the executive director. I have a restaurant called Huli Huli Hawaiian Grill, where we have an entry point for these guys that are coming out of prison and these women where they get to get back into the workforce and start to know who they are, start working with their hands and knowing who they are, their value. I have traveled all over the world speaking. I used to be on the block. Now I get to just play with blocks with my little girl. You want to know what was unexpected? That a life that was just full of revenge would be a life of forgiveness. A life that was cultivated to hate would now be a life of love. That is what is unexpected. Thank you.